Chapter 11. The Journey of Fate. The night was long, and visions of the journey ahead haunted Leon's dreams. But he wasn't the only one to feel overwhelmed. The thought of meeting a god, someone who was there and had more answers than quite honestly either of them were ready for, haunted both him and Vance throughout the night. While Vance had initially been deep in thought, he eventually fell asleep fast and caught some Z's. Leon, on the other hand, had a night that was both very restless and at the same time full of wonder. He woke up time and time again, thinking of what to ask. He knew what he wanted to ask, but was afraid that the answers he was seeking might do more harm than good, or even worse, may not be satisfactory. Would she answer them? Why did they abandon us? For what purpose were we created? These questions and more he had struggled to keep buried throughout the night. The one question that was a far more personal one outweighed the others, and was a simple, yet more perplexing question. Am I strong enough to make it through the dead zone without holding Vance back? He wasn't afraid of asking questions, or even getting answers that might seem unsatisfactory or none at all. No. What really scared him about what was to come was the fact that he had no real-world experience. For what he was about to do, no amount of shadow vision training could prepare him entirely. Sure, he had run off to save the king's son, but he had just ended up having to be the one saved yet again in the end. That count as anything but failure on his part? Before he had much time to think about it, he had to get up and prepare for the day. He began his preparations by tossing his clothes into the atomizer and showering. The shower was a much different feeling now than when he first arrived. He wondered, with so much electricity circulating throughout him and mixing with the water, if this was how an electric eel must feel swimming through the deep oceans. While pondering this, he had intended to ask Hope questions that had been bugging him about the dead zone. It turned out, however, that he didn't have much of a choice in the matter, as Hope was very active today and had brought up some of the questions he had been struggling with throughout the night. It seemed she had been waiting until he was entirely lucid until discussing them with him. So you're wondering about the dead zone and how deep you will need to go to find Fate. Well, unfortunately, the dead zone isn't that easy to navigate. In fact, really, it isn't able to be navigated even by me. Though my data is limited on it, it is highly unlikely that there will ever be a system developed to reliably traverse it. The dead zone is a different space that is affected by celestial energies. We believe it has something to do with its connection to the edge, but we can't be certain. The one advantage you do have is that while you are there are dangerous beings, but it is a complex system that is controlled by Fate herself. This makes it difficult for even the Dark Creator to enter. This means that no dark gods or enemies of any sort will be able to follow you once you enter. And if they dare, they will likely be more lost than you. So you're saying that Fate has called us there, and the only way to find her is to rely on her. But it can't be that easy, can it? Leon asked, wondering if it was really that simple as closing his eyes and walking forward blindly into salvation. No, it's never been that easy. It's dangerous there, and if you make a wrong move, you could be dead and your soul lost inside its trenches. While Fate can nudge you in the right direction, ultimately it is up to you to take the reins for yourself and survive the journey. Though worry not, Fate shouldn't leave you alone in your journey, and should have someone from the Witches' clan meet us just outside. They have a unique ability to read the dead zone and interpret it that far exceeds my own capabilities. They have escorted many before you, and by taking their lead, this should allow you to safely get there without much trouble. I know that you're worried, but at least this may ease your mind a bit. You'll be happy to learn that you won't need to fast travel. The generals have already brought a small transport to a nearby facility to make things easier on you. It's just about a mile away from here. This did make Leon happy, and even smile just a bit. Hope knew how much he hated using the melt device, And truth be told, not many people did enjoy it. It's just that there was no quicker way to travel. Leon now finished his shower, and at the instruction of Hope, he wore something both light and flexible. Due to the desert terrain, there wasn't much of a chance of accumulation, according to Hope. On top of that, Leon was able to keep himself quite warm due to the energy flowing through him. He wouldn't have to worry too much about cooler conditions. The outfit that he had chosen was based off all of these factors. It was fitted with the same design of hiking boots that he arrived with, along with some stretchy cargo pants, a long sleeve shirt, and a hoodie made of insulating material, and was finished with a sleek vest. Outside his room, he met with Vance, who was already ready and waiting on him. He wore similar attire with hiking boots of his own, but his clothing was much more substantial, with a thick leather jacket, scarf, heavy cargo jeans, and even some clear glasses to protect his eyes from flying sand and debris. Leon didn't understand why Vance would need glasses with his energy field, but Hope had suggested it as a precaution and clearly had more experience when it came to the dead zone. Hope had explained to Vance that he would need to bring heavier clothes as a precaution. Unlike Leon, even with Vance's conquest allowing him to control his heart rate and blood flow, at a certain point it may not be enough to counteract the possible conditions of the dead zone. As the two of them headed out, they each grabbed a power bar that Vance had stocked up on while Leon was away with Tesla. They headed through the front door, and as they left, looked back once more at that number 8 on the apartment. Although this was only Leon's second time now to leave the apartment, there was a strange, almost nostalgic feeling. He didn't know when he'd see it again, and for some reason, this made him a bit forlorn. Vance had begun to walk away after a moment, and Leon followed after him. Part 2. Men who had at best been estranged roommates now walked side by side, continuing forward as equals. Neither said a word. It was apparent that they both had a lot on their minds. They were too deep in thought to recognize the other contemplating what was ahead of them. After a moment, that silence was ended by an upbeat Hope. For an AI, she seemed rather perky about where they were headed and about to venture off to. "We interrupt this brooding of silence for a special announcement," she said, with the tone of a newscaster while syncing their fragments so that they both could see and hear her at the same time. "We're just about there," she said, walking in front of both of them, skipping and bouncing along gleefully as they headed towards the aircraft. If one were to close their eyes and listen, it would sound like someone was playing hopscotch by the way she was skipping. "Just what are you so excited about?" Vance asked her. "That's a straightforward question with a much more intricate answer," Hope responded. "We are going on an adventure. That is the simple part. The more complex is that while I love Salutis, as it is where my mainframe is, and where I was built, do you know the last time that I've been able to fulfill my full potential here? That is to say, protect and defend humanity." She asked them both. Neither had an idea, as they were both relatively new here to their new home. The one constant they noticed during their tenure was, besides a few storms outside of the shields, there had been nothing of consequence happening in the grand scheme of things. "The answer is never. Now don't get me wrong, I'm glad for the peace and that I've never had to use Tesla's Teleforce death beams among any of the other intricate defense systems we have in place. I also quite enjoy the stories and seeing the happy lives of each individual within the territory. But just as you are alive, so am I. While I have no soul, my thoughts are my own. While other variations of me are out there fighting and exploring the afterworld at large with others, I cannot experience that in real time. I only get to experience them through what essentially amounts to as memories. While they're indeed nice to have, it isn't ever the same as living through it in real time, as I'm sure you two are well aware. Take, for example, that Guns N' Roses concert you experienced not so long ago, while you were still alive, Leon, or that wedding party you attended, Vance. You can remember it, yes? And it did happen, but nonetheless, it's not a crystal clear replica, is it? While my memory is much more clear than either of yours, it still isn't perfect. For me, it's like being able to watch it on TV. While nice, it isn't the same as being there to create and direct what happens in it. Needless to say, I am ready for some excitement. Neither of my fragments associated with either of you has experienced anything at all new or exciting since we've been together these past few months. I'm ready for that to change. I haven't even had much experience with Leon, as while he was a Tesla, he destroyed so many other fragments that I am just the latest that has been uploaded with the experiences of the others. This is something neither of them had considered. While Hope is a powerful AI, she is essentially alive, and each fragment, when not connected to the mainframe, is essentially a clone, albeit a bit less powerful than their original mainframe. They still each required their own fulfillment. Here she was, stuck with them on their daily routines of training and going to court. While that could be interesting for a novice or scholar, it certainly wasn't going to fulfill the interest of a super intelligent and sophisticated AI like Hope was for too long. Well, if you're this excited about it, maybe we can do a bit better to not be so gloomy and hesitant about the whole thing, Vance told her. Leon just patted down his hair, giving a smile and nod and hand gesture that said, "What the hell?" in agreement. Sure, this would be a challenging task, but it would likely be the most exciting conversation he would ever experience. He had a real chance at real answers. Now was not the time to be scared of getting there. It was a time to find courage and reap the rewards that awaited him at the finish line. That, and he did feel a bit guilty with his new understanding about frying more than a few other hope fragments. The transport was now in view. It was just a little further ahead on a docking platform that reminded Leon of a helipad, but it was much larger so that it could handle different sized aircraft. He, Vance, and of course Hope approached Clavin, who was standing closest to them. He had prepared a couple of bundles for the both of them and approached, handing them each one. "You didn't have to do this," Vance said, hesitantly to take the pack. "I did. As I've told you and the others shortly after we arrived, I am no longer your king. You should not worry about offending me." "I know, but nothing. This was my task with which I was instructed to do. This minor task is nothing compared to the damage I did to other individuals. While I still agree with those choices, I must do what is expected of me to gain favor and complete my atonement for my crimes against those that I did wrong, and to our gods. Now go on." Vance said nothing, and only nodded before grabbing the pack, slowly heading over towards the transport. Leon grabbed his pack from Clavin and started moving that way, but before he got more than a few feet away, he was halted by Clavin. At first, the former king just stared at Leon, but then finally, he held out his hand. Leon hesitated only shortly before grabbing it firmly. Even through his thinly layered energy field, he still felt a slight chill from Clavin's icy hand. "Thank you once again," he told Leon, as he reached out and grabbed the top of Leon's hand with his other. "If not for you, then many more people may have suffered, and my son may have been a true orphan, so for that, I thank you." "I only did what I thought was right and honest." "Spoken like a true farmer's grandson. Truth be told, Dane may have seen a bit more of your memories than just that of your death." Leon gave a half smile, as he was still trying to put that whole ordeal behind him. The two of them finished shaking hands, and he headed for the entrance of the transport. Hope was waiting, standing between Vance and Leon, before following him after he was done with the ex-king. Ahead, both Ragnar and Dabriana awaited them. Dabriana now looked as good as the day Leon had met him. The one significant difference was that he had some sort of eye replacement that was clearly different from his original, and even a different color. He looked at the two men now stopped in front of him, one a veteran that had experience in the outlands of Afterworld, the other a fresh arrival who had more experience with captivity than any real combat experience in either life combined. Still, now wasn't the time to doubt him, as a god had set their sights on meeting the young man. Ragnar, along with everyone in Salutis who had known about it, had done what they could in his absence to make sure he was prepared for his journey.
Alright, you two, listen up. We've cleave and pick the essentials into your bundles. The right meat, fruit, water, toiletries, and all other necessities. The dead zone is always changing. The journey can take anywhere from a few hours to over a month. We've also picked a few other non-insignificant items, specifically some grenades. I'm sure you're familiar, Vance, but Leon, I'm guessing you weren't trained on these at all.
Leon looked surprised. Would they really need grenades for where they were going?
Grenades are pretty easy to use. Grip the lever, pull the pin, and throw. Make sure you do it in that order or you might have some problems.
Vance just snickered. Dabriana gave him a slight smile and continued.
If you have any problems, I'm sure Up can assist you when needed. While the dead zone itself can be dangerous, getting to it is just as dangerous. As we mentioned, you will come to a spot before the dead zone that you can no longer fly, and will be out of contact with any of us. You will have to traverse a little bit of a desert-like region on foot. Inside the mountain cave, the area known as Inn's Peak is the entrance to the dead zone. The path there also borders the blooming apostate's domain. This means you'll need to remain vigilant of any other humans around the area. I didn't have time to mention it before, but there has been an expansion from the other groups after Remy fell. More than likely, if you come across anyone other than one of the witches, they will not be friendly, and could be more dangerous than you're equipped to handle. The blooming apostates are the most influential faction of humans aligned with the Dark Gods. In terms of raw power, they even have those that rival as generals.
This means stay on your guard, and watch out for one another. No playing hero like you did at the castle, lad. Got it? Now get on board, you lot.
The two generals moved out of their way, and Vance and Leon gathered their gear, moving forward. They climbed into the transport, which was now about to embark on what Hope had described as an adventure, though it was still to be determined what kind of adventure it would turn out to be.
Take good care of him, Vance,
Clavin said, now standing beside the generals, watching the hatch close.
Leave it to me,
Vance said, holding back the formalities he was used to directing towards his former king.
Look after the both of them, Hope,
Dabriana told her.
Will do, sir,
Hope said gleefully, sending the message to her fragment that was recently reinstated upon Dabriana's wrist. Ragnar just gave Leon a look and a nod to let him know he had confidence in his abilities and to do his best. The men continued to look at one another as the hatch closed completely, coming to a silent halt. The men were now ready to begin their journey ahead. Part 3. The two men turned around, looking at the transport. It was much smaller than what they had expected, but in reality it was still pretty large for just the two of them. Without knowing the exact size, Leon guessed it was about a third of the size of the SFT, while Vance thought it was only 2/5 smaller. Neither was quite correct in the matter. It was actually closer to 3/7 the size. There were only 5 seats in the small transport compared to the vast rows in the SFT. The seats were set up in a sideways X formation, with enough space in between them that you could walk past each other easily. I take it you'll be driving? Leon asked Hope, who had already synced up with the onboard fragment.
Well, of course. As much as I hate to say it, your track record of destroying things in the past few months is pretty bad. Are you that eager to destroy another of my fragments and components?
Well, no. I'm pretty sure Tesla is going to start charging me if I break this one or anything else.
Break? I think when we're dealing with you, it should be considered completely destroyed beyond repair.
Leon rolled his eyes and shrugged as he finished putting his pack away in the nearby storage compartment. Vance, by this point, had already finished putting his away and took a seat next to Hope in what looked to be the co-pilot's chair. Leon took the position in the middle and noticed it had the same bit of tech as the SFT. There was a hologram projector for the outside of the plane that could be turned on, located in the front center console. There was also the same type of water station that Leon had used before. He had learned the disposable cups were then sent into a small atomizer as to not waste the material and maintain sanitary conditions. This brought up an important point that he was curious about. Hope, has anyone ever been sick here?
Hold that thought for a moment.
The engines kicked on and they could all feel the transport lifting up. Hope engaged the cloaking mechanism, and the transport continued to rise up until it reached the ceiling of Salutis. There, the shields vanished from above them, allowing them to pass through perfectly. The cloak from the aircraft maintained the full city cloak. Rain began to pelt the transport the instant that section of the shield had been lowered. Once outside wholly, the sun disappeared, and all that they were left with was the ambient night sky and 2 moons. A moment later, there was a vibration that shook the transport as it blasted forward silently at top speed. In just a couple seconds, the rumbling died down, and the flight became as smooth as if they were still stationed on the docking platform.
Sorry about that. I thought you'd want to enjoy the view before we left, and the conversation may have been a little inconsistent during all of that. Now, has anyone been sick? Well, that depends on what you quantify as being sick. In the traditional sense, no. Humans who have died and have had their souls transformed into the afterlife bodies are not impacted by normal viruses or diseases of any sort, unless someone who has died of a disease gained the ability to manipulate the body in a negative way. This could cause someone to be sick, and the only way to counter that is a conquest user with a healing function. That, or a healing item that has been blessed by the gods. Then there is earthly magic, which is the teaching of the gods' language to the witches. It can be used to create and destroy based on how powerful and talented the souls are that use it. Again, this can only be enhanced with particular blessed objects. Why haven't I seen anyone here use magic? It would seem that with your help, many could become an expert magician in little time, couldn't they? You're thinking of something like, repeat after me, are you not? That would be simple indeed. The problem is that the gods have made limits to what one can and cannot do. This is why they created the witches and taught them magic. As you were told by Ragnar, the souls of the living have the energy of life, which is the most potent essence and is why they are sought after by the dark gods and guardians. Only with that, are you able to use the god's language, which has the ability to create? This is as simple as I can put it. The souls of the dead do not contain the necessary components to do so.
Leon contemplated this and realized that his new body, while a vast improvement over his old, still had its limits. He also didn't know if his new one was actually better, or if he just had a better understanding of it. This gave him another idea. Couldn't one of the witches use one of your fragments and then have that ability? Hope turned to him as the ship continued to fly straight. After all, this projection was just a hologram of herself, and she had a keen ability to multitask with the use of different fragments, as Leon had seen before.
This was thought of before. The problem is, while your bodies and soul have limits, so do that of the living. Simply put, their minds cannot handle the level of input that yours can. While it is complete utter nonsense that they use only 10% of their minds at a time, it is not inaccurate to say one cannot possibly use all of it at once. The more strain one has on their synapses, the more problems may occur. This is why you can use my functions at a higher level than most others here, Leon. This is due to your natural aptitude for handling electricity and current in your body. This is a significant benefit when using more processes and allows for your synapses to work faster and fire stronger signals. On the other hand, while others such as Vance are unable to use me at that extent, I am able to still do a lot more for them. This is due to the pure fact that your bodies are more durable than that of the living. If I were to even try to assimilate my minimal functions with that of someone with a living body, the sheer shock would cause them to have an instant seizure, if not kill them. So, unfortunately, the witches must do it the old-fashioned way and work upon it within the extent of their own abilities.
Leon didn't know everything there was about the differences between souls and bodies of the living and dead, but what Hope had said made perfect sense in an abstract view. Vance was sitting there listening, and it looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. He continued listening and contemplating what he had just heard. Hope turned back around and began messing with her hair like a secretary just waiting for something to happen. Hope, how fast is this transport ship?
While it is a smaller craft, it is designed for speedy travel. It has a max speed of 75,412 miles per hour on a straight direct flight. It has limited shielding functions and even more limited weapons capabilities, as its main strength is its speed. However, combat cannot be achieved at anything over about 5,000 miles per hour, as accuracy is a factor. One of the primary functions of the shields is to keep the ship together. Without it, we would not be able to travel at this speed, as the ship runs the risk of falling apart from the stress of the force upon it. That's not to say it's guaranteed to occur immediately, but it is almost certain to occur given enough time.
After a while, the group began to do their own thing. Hope focused on piloting the transport, while Vance had decided to take a nap. Leon was still curious about the outside world and wanted to see more of it than what he could see outside the front window or side windows. He thought about getting up to turn on the hologram, but before he could act, Hope sent visual images into his head.
This is what you wanted to see, right? Sometimes I forget you can read my thoughts,
Leon said, sitting back and enjoying what was now in front of him. The images were crystal clear. It was the equivalent to looking at something with a virtual reality headset on, except it was authentic in every sense. He heard the sounds outside, the wind, the birds, and when focusing, he could listen to the animals running below. Everywhere he looked, he was able to see something new and exciting. They had finally made it off the ocean's coast and inland. They were now at a large green lush field with flowers and trees. He was able to see vines draping from each tree and the interconnectivity of the ecosystem as a whole. He couldn't focus on one spot for too long, as they were moving at phenomenal speeds. Even with the incredible imaging capabilities of the transport, he was able to look at something focused for a short amount of time before it would become distorted. How long until we're in range of the blooming apostate's kingdom? Vance asked, turning on the hologram to his left before laying back in his chair.
At this rate, it will be about 10 minutes until we are in visual range,
Hope told him. I don't think the kid is ready to see all that brutality. Keep that in mind as we approach, Vance said, knowing very well the misery and pure savagery that takes place there.
You're probably right. I'll turn off the holo before we get there.
They had just entered a familiar snowy region along another coastline, with a small hillside short in the distance still somewhat full of colorful flowers. A few months had passed since they were here, but half of the field was still partially torn up from the battle that ensued between the flat-faced god and Dabriana. Some of it even remained barren still. Nearby on the hill, there was a skull branded with the blooming apostate's insignia. It was held up by the skeleton of a hand pierced by a pike.
That's odd,
Hope said, noticing what Leon was looking at. Vance sat up after seeing what was on the hologram beside him. "Why in the fuck are they out here?" he asked in an almost panicked voice. "Didn't the other gods want to expand their territory to the weaker factions that they controlled? If so, then why is the most favored human faction of the Dark Creator out here now? Just what in the hell is going on?" Hope slowed down for a moment. "We need to get an idea of what we are really headed into. If they have expanded out this far, then the entrance to the dead zone could be in jeopardy as well." Hope brought the ship to a halt, and it hovered high above the half-desolated field of flowers where the battle had taken place. Leon continued to use the visual aid that Hope had given him and started to look around. Vance watched what he was looking at through the hologram, and soon enough, they understood exactly what was going on. Leon looked over towards the snow leopard's kingdom, and as soon as he had done so, he regretted it immediately.
"Here, Peggy, come get some fresh meat," a woman with a red silk frilly bandana said. What she had said wasn't as important as to what was going on. A naked man was on all fours crying as he scurried through a literal pool of blood filled with intestines and feces. A woman nearby was crying and screaming in agony. The man in the pool went over to the woman who had called him Piggy. In one hand, she held a saw that was smeared, dripping with fresh blood, and in the other, she held the foot of the crying woman. The man grabbed the meat out of her hand with his mouth. "That's a good boy," the woman in the bandana said once more. "Go on, eat it, Peggy." Slowly, the man began to eat away at the fresh-cut foot. The girl was still screaming and crying as she watched the man tear the flesh away from her foot. She looked relatively young, though it was hard for any of them to say how old given how reincarnated bodies work. That didn't matter. What mattered was that she was in pain and agony from the helplessness of watching the man in front of her devour her foot whole. "Now are you going to disobey me again, you little slut? Are you going to try and get testy with me again? Or are you going to fucking listen to your master's orders?" the woman asked as the girl continued to cry and scream. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good, Serenity," the girl cried. "What did you say? What did you call me, you dumb little slut?" Serenity asked the girl, putting the saw on her other foot, and started to saw away. "Master, I'll be good, master," the girl said in a panic. There, that's all you needed to say," Serenity said, removing the saw from above her ankle. She didn't get too far, but enough to cause a lot of bleeding with a quarter-inch deep cut left in the girl's leg. "Here, La, come and take care of my little trap." A man approached, passing by a twisted wheel of fortune game. In it, a man was pinned up on a nearby wheel that was being spun by men and women alike. Most of them were dressed in fancy clothing and seemed to be almost jovial at what they were doing. Burn him alive, feed him his own cock, rape him, cut off his testicles, and replace his eyes with them. The demented list written on the wheel went on. There was further abuse going on all round, and depraved acts of blood-soaked orgies, people participating in necrophilia, and others raped and tortured in various disgusting ways. These were corrupt beings. It would be hard to call them human, as they diminished the humanity of others for their own enjoyment. This is what Remy meant. These are the overstock, and this is what's being done to them, Leon said in disgust. Leon was doing all that he could to hold in the rage as his hair stood up, and sparks began to emit from his skin, crackling. Calm down, calm down. Deep breaths. Control yourself,
Hope said, to remind Leon not to go overboard in the small ship. She stopped the projection of images into his retinas so that he wouldn't have to see it in such detail, and he took a deep breath. He continued to watch the hologram in front of him like Vance had been. Vance, meanwhile, was sitting there trembling, and seemed even more upset than Leon as the girl continued to moan and ache as the missing foot began to grow back. After the man began to heal her, the other wounds started to vanish as well.
If you ever disobey me again, I'll have a piggy eat your tits right off of you. Is that understood?
Serenity asked the girl, who was now released, sitting there shivering with piss still running down her shocked body.
And you, piggy, don't forget to eat it down to the bone. That includes the toenails.
The girl, trembling from fear, just nodded and followed the entitled Serenity into the castle naked. Men and women alike looked at her, licking their lips as they continued committing depraved acts. The man in the pool of shit, blood, and organs just continued to cry and gag as he ate the foot piece by piece, the toenails crunching as they mixed with the tough flesh of the girl's foot. Vance was still shaking. His eyes were watering as he continued to look at the man who was in the blood, eating the foot.
You know him,
Hope said, reading his thoughts. I do, Vance struggled to say aloud. He was there when Remy attacked. He was the first one killed. He was killed by one of the Guardians, his head bitten off as he and Enzo attacked the Guardian.
How is he still alive?
Leon asked, still shocked at what was taking place below them. His head was devoured, it's true, but the creature didn't do much more than that. What saved him was that Remy was upset by this when interfering with his audience. It seems that his soul escaped consumption, and after a time he was once again reanimated. The flat-faced god must not have worried about devouring those dead on the cart, and, well... Looking around, Vance noticed more of its brethren from the snow leopard's kingdom, and after a moment, he could no longer bear to watch. Let's go, Hope. There's nothing we can do for them. And I don't want to keep watching him in this state, Vance said, knowing very well they had to keep the commitment ahead. Can you alert the generals of the situation, and have them tell Claven as well?
I understand. I have sent the message, and have also let them know of the territorial situation that has occurred. There may be more at work here than just the blooming apostate's expansion of territory,
Hope said, putting the engines into drive, which forced the transport to speed ahead, leaving the state of misery of those at the previous kingdom behind.
Why is this allowed to continue? Isn't that what the Resistance and Salutis stand for? To prevent these types of situations from happening?
It's not that simple, kid. The Dark Gods aren't the only ones with firepower to challenge us. They're honestly just the cherry on top of the shit world sundae. Even if they weren't in the picture, we've all known for a long time that there are strong factions out there. It's partially why Claven gave in so easily. Salutis is pretty much the only completely peaceful place remaining in this shit world. Sure, there may be smaller factions made of good people out there, those that have gone into hiding, surviving, making it just by barely. They don't compare to the number of horrors that remain. While the blooming apostates is by far the worst, the others are not anything majestic. This is what happens when you take the raw depravity of the human soul and combine it with the no checks, no fear of retribution, divine or otherwise. You take away that which kept the worst of humanity at least somewhat in line, and what are you left with? Those who are favored by the dark gods are given free rein to do anything they want. Sure, Salutis has an advantage of technology, and in some regards does have strong fighters. Still, there are many out here that can equal them. Just like Dabriana said before we left, the chosen few blessed by the dark gods in the blooming apostates ranks can easily match the general's blow for blow, kid. Now that they're expanding, it's just going to cause us to lose more numbers and make saving the innocent harder. Fuck it all. I don't see any hope in sight. No offense to you, he said, looking at Hope. I just don't see how we're going to face these overwhelming odds.
I understand your frustration and concerns. As things are now, we are at a clear disadvantage, but we can only try our best to change what we can. I will do everything in my abilities to make sure the goals of Salutis continue to shine through.
Leon had known it was grim, but until now he didn't realize just how bad things were. The fear he felt and despair he had suffered during his time at the Snow Leopard's kingdom now seemed inconsequential to that which he had just witnessed. If he had the chance to switch places with the girl from before, would he do so willingly? He always thought of himself as virtuous and empathetic, but could he? Could he go through that humiliation and pain day in and day out, where not even death would be a long-term escape? It wasn't a question he wished to linger on for too long, as he didn't know if he'd like the answer.
A communication is coming through from Salutis. This will be our last contact with them until we return. Keep in mind, we're getting close to the maximum distance of the transmission capabilities,
Hope alerted them. The hologram changed from the outside view to the image of a slender old gentleman that Leon was very used to after his near-year experience living with him.
Listen, we've received the data about the expansion of the blooming apostate's territory into what was left over from the Snow Leopard's kingdom. We're not sure what's going on, but we'll be sure to try and get to the bottom of it using any means necessary. Neither of you needs to worry about it. We understand the situation, and we will try and come up with something to do. You two just need to continue the task at hand, and be sure to come back safely on,
Tesla said, with a bit of worry on his face. Don't get so sentimental on me now, Tesla. Besides, you trained me for this. I think I'll be okay with your teachings and all I learned training with Hope. Leon paused for a minute, thinking back at everything. I never did get to thank you before I left, so I'll say it now. Thank you.
There's no need for that. What's done is done, and I was glad to be able to at least pay my debts back a little. We don't have time for this,
Ragnar said, as he appeared at the hologram standing next to Tesla in the General's conference room inside of the HQ building.
Vance, Leon, with the expansion of the territory this far away from where they were just a few months ago, you could easily be headed into a hostile environment. We can't be sure that's the case. But to assume that they have just taken over the territory here because it was available would be a naive thing to do. You'll need to be on guard while you head towards fate. It's likely the expansion could have been near the dead zone as well. With that in mind, watch either as... We are now out of range of the capabilities of Tesla's communication towers, Hope alerted them. I would have stopped, but given the time constraints, we must keep moving forward. This is to ensure we arrive on time, given our obstacles we may face along the way, and given the new information.
Neither Vance nor Leon had anything to say to this. They both wished they could have had a moment longer, in case there was something else important that they could have learned. Truth be told, they were both again feeling uneasy about where they were headed, and what could be waiting for them. With everything they had seen a few minutes ago, it was unclear as to what they would have to face after they left the safety of the stealth transport. Only time would tell if they would make it through this adventure unscathed.